I waited 12 years for her to call me hers, but when she finally did, it was only to say I made her boyfriend uncomfortable. 12 years. That's how long I stood by Lisa. Not as a boyfriend, not as a lover, but something in between, a placeholder between her flings, a secret confidant after every breakup, a steady shadow while she chased excitement elsewhere. Everyone around us thought I was just being patient, that eventually the heart of a flirt would settle and I'd be the one she chose. Even I started believing that lie. She never gave me a reason to walk away, just enough crumbs to keep me standing still. She called me late at night when things with someone else went wrong. She knew I wouldn't say no. I was the safety net, the backup plan she never acknowledged out loud. Sometimes she'd tease, calling me her forever option, her Romeo, the one guy who never left no matter how many others came and went. And I stayed. God, I stayed. Everyone joked I was her endgame. Our friends placed bets on when we'd finally make it official. I laughed along. How could I tell them I wasn't even sure if I existed in her future? But when she started posting fewer photos with boys and more casual updates, when she stopped flirting in the group chat and smiled more often when I entered the room, I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, my wait was finally ending. She organized a get-together, said she had an announcement. Joel, my closest friend, nudged me and winked. She's finally coming around, man. I didn't respond, but deep down, I was already rehearsing what I'd say if she confessed. That night, she arrived late. Behind her was a young man, fresh-faced, shy, nearly a decade younger than us. She looped her arm through his and smiled at him like he was the world. Introduced him as her boyfriend, said they'd been together for 2 months, then added, "He's a bit shy, please don't scare him." The same line she once used to introduce me to this very group. No one spoke, not immediately. Joel glanced at me. I stared at the bottom of my glass, bitter liquid swirling. The silence hurt more than anything, because they all knew. They knew I loved her. And still, none of us had the right to question her choice, not even me. Later that night, I opened our old group chat to find myself removed, kicked out, no explanation. I messaged her privately, just a simple question, was that necessary? A minute later, her reply came. "Henry, your presence makes Adam uncomfortable. Let's not stay in touch for now." For now, as if she was doing me a favor, as if I hadn't built 12 years of loyalty into something she could so easily pause. I stared at the screen, waiting for the anger to rise, but it didn't. Just silence. Like something inside me had finally broken so cleanly, there was no pain, just cold understanding. Exactly 32 days later, I found myself being pulled into a crowd outside a floral boutique. The street was filled with red roses, music, and a gathering of familiar faces. Joel stood at the edge of the circle, motioning me forward. At the center was Lisa, dressed beautifully, bouquet trembling in her hands. "I'm sorry," she said, cheeks flushed. "I should have seen it sooner. You were always the one. Can you give me another chance?" I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a bright red envelope, and handed it to her. "I'm getting married next week," I said, voice steady. "I hope you can make it." Her face paled, her fingers clutching the invitation like it was something burning. I walked away without looking back. I wasn't born into privilege, I was brought in. My earliest memories are wrapped in the scent of old paperbacks and the dust-stained curtains of my grandmother's home in the southern province. My parents, one a man with cold eyes, the other a woman who loved quietly but never lingered, sent me away when I was barely walking. I wasn't raised with the expectation of greatness, but rather the hope that I wouldn't be a burden. When I was 14, after my grandmother passed, I was pulled out of that quiet, familiar life and delivered to the Lynn family estate near the capital. Lisa was the first to speak to me. I still remember the exact moment, me standing awkwardly at the edge of the marble hallway, my cheap suitcase clutched in both hands, my Mandarin marked with a slow, southern drawl. The housekeeper had told me to wait for Miss Lisa. I expected someone stern, like the woman who had dropped me off. Instead, she came in barefoot, her hair tied messily, holding a popsicle in one hand and a tennis racket in the other. "You must be Henry," she said, cocking her head like I was a puzzle she was deciding whether or not to solve. When I nodded, too shy to speak, she grinned. "You talk slow, that's cute." Then, before I could react, she grabbed my wrist and pulled me down the hall. "Come on. If you're going to live here, you have to learn the rules." From that moment on, Lisa became both tormentor and savior. She teased me mercilessly, mocked the way I said certain words, took the cap off my pen mid-writing, hid my school shoes before important events. But when other boys at school sneered at my background or mimicked my accent, it was Lisa who stepped between us. She'd flick their foreheads, flash that sharp tongue of hers, and walk away like she hadn't just defended me with the ferocity of a lioness. In private, when we were alone, she'd jump on my back from behind and yell, "Say it, say you're my little brother." I'd groan and try to shake her off. "Lisa, you're only 2 months older." "So what?" she'd say, clinging tighter. I said say it. Eventually, I gave in, not because she wore me down, but because secretly, I wanted her to never stop calling me hers. She nicknamed me Romeo after a school play. I didn't even get the lead role, but when I stood on stage, flushed and wooden with nerves, reciting lines to Juliet in front of hundreds of parents and peers, she screamed from the audience, "That's my Romeo!" The name stuck. She used it like a private language, something only she was allowed to call me. When others tried, she'd roll her eyes and say, "He's my Romeo, find your own." It wasn't love, not quite, but it also wasn't just friendship. We existed in a space between labels. I never crossed the line, I never tried. There was no confession, just a quiet devotion that lived in the details, bringing her the drink she liked after class, remembering the way she curled her hair when she was stressed, laughing at her jokes even when they weren't funny. She never told me she loved me. But she never told me to stop loving her either. Our friends knew. Of course, they did. The circle had been the same since middle school. Joel, the loud one, Nadia, sharp-eyed and sharp-tongued, Greg, who rarely spoke unless it was to roast someone, and Lisa, the queen bee without trying. I was the quiet one, the background presence. But they all knew, when Lisa entered the room, my eyes followed. When Lisa cried, I was the first to reach her. When she dated someone new, I disappeared for a while. "You're the endgame," Joel once said at a party, handing me a warm soda. "She'll mess around, but you're the one she comes back to, she just doesn't know it yet." I didn't respond, I just looked across the room where Lisa was arguing with her then boyfriend, tears already welling. She glanced at me through the crowd, and I knew I'd be the one she ran to after. And I always was. The only person who ever challenged that rhythm was Kimberly. She was my next-door neighbor before I moved to the capital, 2 years older, always had her nose buried in a book, and wore the same pair of canvas shoes until the soles gave out. We weren't particularly close, but whenever I cried, over bullies, over loneliness, she somehow found me. She never said much. Just patted my head and asked softly, "Are you feeling hurt?" There was one boy who used to throw rocks at me from across the schoolyard. One day, he vanished. When I asked around, someone said Kimberly cornered him behind the science lab and gave him a beating so bad, he transferred schools. She never confirmed it. Just offered me a banana milk and told me to drink up. I hadn't seen her in years, not until recently. And Adam? Adam was a wild card, charming, smooth, the kind of guy who could make you feel like his best friend within 5 minutes. He joined our friend group in college and instantly clicked with everyone, even Lisa, especially Lisa. He never showed signs of being interested in her romantically, at least not openly, but I saw the way he stood between her and trouble. I saw how often she reached for him when she laughed. I saw how Joel went quiet whenever Adam and Lisa locked eyes a little too long. Still, Lisa always came to me. Even if she spent the night drinking with Adam, she'd call me at 2 in the morning, asking me to talk her through her headache. Even if she danced with someone else, her coat always ended up on my shoulders. Even when she dated other men, she'd tell me first, like seeking permission she never acknowledged. Our whole group played along. Joel, especially, would nudge me with that knowing look. "When are you two making it official?" he'd ask every other week. Lisa would roll her eyes, toss popcorn at him, and lean her head on my shoulder. "Henry's my Romeo," she'd say sweetly. "He'll wait forever, won't you?" And I did. Until she made it clear I wasn't the one she was saving the ending for. The message arrived like any other casual ping. "Lisa, posting in our old friend group chat. Let's meet at the usual spot tonight, I've got something to share." Joel replied first, half joking as always. "Oh? Getting formal now. Our heartbreaker finally ready to announce her retirement from the game?" Nadia dropped a surprised emoji. Greg chimed in with a sarcastic prayer gif. Lisa just sent one word. "Yes." That single syllable made the entire group fall silent, then spiral into chaos. "No way." Did I read that right? She's not joking, right? Is our Romeo finally getting his ending? Joel tagged me, of course. Congrats in advance, Henry, it's finally happening. I didn't reply, not immediately. My hands froze on the keyboard. That tight, impossible hope I'd spent years tamping down cracked open again. Maybe this was it. We all gathered at our usual rooftop bar downtown, the same spot we'd been meeting at since our university days, worn couches, string lights, an endless view of the skyline. I was the first to arrive. Then Joel, then the others, trickling in with laughter and light teasing. Lisa was the last to show. She stepped out of the elevator wearing a pearl-colored dress, her makeup soft and glowing under the lights. But it wasn't her that made the group quiet, it was the boy walking beside her. He looked barely 20, wide eyes, polished shoes, nervous smile. He trailed just half a step behind her, like someone too shy to match her stride. Lisa's arm looped through his effortlessly. "Everyone," she said, voice sweet, "this is Adam, my boyfriend." Not a single voice rose in response. Adam offered a polite wave. "Hi," he said, then added, "Lisa told me so much about you." Joel let out a sharp, awkward laugh. "Wow, you really kept this one under wraps, Lisa." He shot me a glance, quick, worried. I picked up my glass and took a sip, my stomach had go towards hollow. Lisa didn't seem to notice, or maybe she didn't care. Her entire focus was on Adam, her gaze soft, her voice gentle. I hadn't seen her look at someone like that before. Not even during her longer relationships. They sat close, too close. She tucked her hand into his arm, and he leaned into her touch with the kind of ease I recognized painfully well, because I used to sit in that same spot. I used to be the one who'd hand her the straw she liked, who'd shield her from the wind on that very rooftop, who knew her exact drink order without asking. I stayed quiet the entire evening. Didn't speak unless spoken to, smiled when I needed to, watched Lisa pretend like we were old school friends, nothing more. At some point, I excused myself to the balcony. Joel followed after a minute. "You okay?" he asked, lighting a cigarette. He didn't offer me one. He knew I didn't smoke. I nodded. "Sure." He looked over his shoulder at the group still inside. "You don't look okay." "Does it matter?" I asked. Joel didn't answer. He didn't need to. When I got home that night, the group chat was buzzing, messages flying, congratulatory, playful, teasing. Nadia sent red packets. Greg posted memes about Lisa finally being tamed. I smiled faintly and typed a quick, "Congrats." Message failed to send. A red exclamation mark appeared beside it. I blinked. Checked the chat again. I was no longer a member. A notification popped up. "Lisa. Sorry, Henry, Adam's a bit sensitive. Your presence makes him uncomfortable. Let's not stay in touch for now." I stared at her message for a long time, not angry, not even surprised, just tired. I could still remember her voice from years ago. Cold night, fireworks overhead. She had been leaning against my shoulder, half asleep from the wine. "Other than my parents, you matter the most to me," she'd whispered. "Don't ever disappear, okay?" And I hadn't. For 12 years I stayed. Through her flings, her breakdowns, her birthdays, and breakups. I stayed when she needed someone. I stayed when she didn't. Now, with 4 words, she'd erased all of it. "Let's not stay in touch." I didn't reply, didn't ask why, didn't fight to be allowed back. I closed the chat, turned off my phone, then I stood in the dark, staring at the wall across from me until my eyes stopped burning. Something inside me shifted. The ache was still there, but dulled. The longing didn't scream anymore, it was just quiet. I didn't cry, didn't break things, I just exhaled and walked away. The city made too much noise when I needed silence, so I packed a bag, booked a train ticket, and left without telling anyone. I hadn't been back to my grandmother's house in almost a decade. The town was just as I remembered it, slower, softer. The roads were narrower, the sky felt wider, people still smiled at strangers on the street even if their faces had aged. The house sat at the end of a cracked stone path, its chipped wooden door framed by vines that had climbed higher than the windows. The paint had faded to a dull gray, but the structure stood strong, just like she had. I unlocked the door with the old brass key that still hung from the chain around my neck. It creaked open with a sigh, as if the house, too, remembered me. The scent of time hit me first, dust, wood, and the faint trace of her perfume still clinging to the curtains. I didn't turn on the lights. I let the quiet in, let it press against my skin, let it settle in my chest. I set my bag down, walked to the bookshelf in the corner, and ran a hand over the spines. She used to read to me every night, fables, poems, old love stories. When I cried, she'd press her palm to my back and whisper, "Don't let the world take your kindness away." I didn't know then that it would take 12 years for me to finally understand what she meant. I slept on the floor that first night, just like I used to when she let me stay up reading under the lamp. I woke to the sound of rain tapping on the roof. The skies here didn't roar with thunder like in the city. They wept softly, like someone remembering something too late. Later that morning, I stepped out to sweep the leaves off the porch. That's when I saw her, Kimberly. She stood by the low fence separating our homes, a folded umbrella in one hand, a small dog leash in the other. Her hair was longer now, tied in a low ponytail, same calm eyes, same quiet presence. She didn't smile, just nodded. "You're back," she said. "Yeah," I replied, brushing the rain off my sleeves. She crouched to adjust her puppy's collar. It was a small golden retriever, the same breed I used to play with here when we were kids. When she looked up again, there was something hesitant in her voice. "The house must be damp. If you need warm food, my dad still cooks too much." I started to decline. She tilted her head. "Still too polite, Henry?" I smiled for the first time in days. That afternoon, I visited her house. Her father, Uncle Huang, welcomed me with a slap on the back and a steaming bowl of soup. He didn't ask why I was back. He didn't ask about Lisa. He just served me another spoonful. That night, when Kimberly left the room to fetch something, Uncle Huang leaned close. "I'm getting old," he said quietly. "I don't know how many more winters I'll see. That girl won't say it, but she's been waiting a long time for someone to choose her. Just thought you should know." He passed me an envelope, a medical report. I didn't need to read past the first line to understand. When I left their house, Kimberly was standing outside, arms crossed loosely. "What did he say?" "Nothing important," I lied. She looked at me for a long second, then turned toward her door. "You're not very good at lying, Henry." Over the next few days, we fell into a rhythm. She brought me groceries I didn't ask for. I returned her umbrella the next day, even though she never mentioned it. She made tea in the evenings, letting it steep while we sat on the porch in silence. She didn't fill the air with questions. She didn't dig at the wounds I wasn't ready to unwrap. She just sat there. Present. Her dog followed me around like a shadow. I called him Pudding. He seemed to like it. At night, I found old notebooks buried in drawers, drawings I made as a kid, silly poems I wrote in margins. Note: My grandmother had scribbled to remind herself to buy more oranges because Henry likes them. I wasn't crying, but my chest ached the way a cracked cup aches when warm water is poured in. Lisa tried to contact me 5 times in the first week. Different numbers, one even came from Joel's phone. "She just wants to talk," his message read. I didn't reply. I blocked her again. She sent flowers. I left them at the gate. She sent mutual friends. I didn't open the door. I didn't hate her. I didn't even blame her anymore. That was the strange part. I just didn't feel anything when her name lit up on my phone. 12 years of devotion had ended not in a scream, but in a quiet refusal to answer. One evening, Kimberly brought over a stack of books. "I figured you'd run out of things to reread." She placed them gently on the table. "This one's poetry. You used to like that." "You remembered?" I asked. She didn't answer, just nodded and poured the tea. Later that night, I watched her from the window. She sat by her bedroom desk, sketching something under the soft glow of her lamp. Rain tapped gently on the glass between us. Her hair fell across her shoulder, her posture relaxed. And for the first time in weeks, my breath felt calm. Not joyful, not ecstatic, but calm. Like I'd finally stepped out of a storm that had raged far too long. It started with murmurs in town, then came the questions. "Did you hear someone bought the old white brick villa next door?" A big truck brought in boxes labeled Chanel and Saint Laurent. "Who wears heels in this weather?" I didn't pay attention, at first. I was too busy repairing the fence outside, watching Kimberly teach Pudding to fetch in the grass, quietly enjoying the kind of life that didn't need explaining. Then the car arrived. A white Koenigsegg, flashy, sleek, completely out of place among the modest hatchbacks and delivery bikes. It parked outside the neighboring villa with the kind of arrogance that didn't belong here. Lisa stepped out. Her hair was styled perfectly, her lips a soft coral pink, her heels clicked against the stone walkway like punctuation marks. She didn't look at me, not yet, but she knew I'd seen her. For 3 days, she didn't speak, just lingered on the porch, pretending to scroll her phone, glancing up every time I passed by. I ignored her. Kimberly noticed, of course. She never said anything, but she watered her plants a little more loudly, stayed a little longer on the porch swing, made sure I was never left alone in silence. On the 4th day, Lisa knocked. I didn't open the door. She knocked again, then messaged. "Lisa, please, just 5 minutes." Blocked. The next morning, a message from Joel appeared. "Joel, you should come into town today, something's happening, and I think it's meant for you." I was already suspicious before I arrived. The main street was unusually crowded, with people whispering, cameras raised, and a sea of red roses stretching down the cobblestones like spilled fire. Banners of satin fluttered above with gold script I didn't bother reading. A live quartet played something soft and romantic under a lace-draped arch. "Looks like someone's proposing," an old vendor nearby said, arranging his peanuts. "She's been standing there for an hour, waiting." At the center stood Lisa, holding a bouquet of Juliet roses, trembling. Behind her were our old friends, Nadia, Greg, even Joel, arms crossed, leaning casually against a post with a knowing smirk on his face. Lisa saw me before the crowd did, her lips parted, the corners of her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, her heels clicked forward, slow and deliberate until she stood a breath away from me. "Henry," she said. The crowd began to cheer, phones rising like a wall of flashing eyes. "I was stupid," she began, voice cracking. "I thought I wanted excitement. I thought I wanted something new. Adam, he sold my family's bidding documents to competitors. He left the country with a smile and half my father's company." Gasps rippled through the crowd. "I lost everything, and still, the only name I called was yours." She raised the bouquet between us. "You were the only one who ever truly loved me. I see that now. I know it's late. But can we try again?" For a long moment, I didn't speak. Then I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a deep red envelope, thick and velvety. I handed it to her with a gentle smile. "I'm getting married next week," I said. "I hope you can come." The air split open, gasps, a silence that rang louder than any orchestra. Lisa stared at the envelope as if it burned her fingers. "Stop joking," she whispered, her voice brittle. "This isn't funny." "I'm not joking," I said quietly. She looked past me, toward Joel, who gave her a half smile, a shrug, then toward the others, their eyes wide with disbelief. "You didn't tell me," she breathed. "None of you told me." Tears gathered fast, uncontrollable, streaking down her cheeks as she clutched the envelope and pressed it to her chest like it might disappear if she held it tight enough. "I'm sorry, Lisa," I said gently, "but I've moved on." No, you can't." She reached forward, grabbing my wrist. "You don't love her, you love me." I stepped back, breaking her grip. "Maybe," I replied. "But love isn't a leash." Her knees buckled slightly, the bouquet slipped from her fingers, roses scattering onto the ground like falling promises. She dropped to her knees, hugging herself as sobs tore through her throat. "Please," she whispered, "don't marry someone else just to hurt me." I crouched, looked her in the eye, and said calmly, "I'm not marrying her to hurt you, I'm marrying Kimberly because she never asked me to wait 12 years for nothing." Then I turned, walked through the crowd, and didn't look back. 2 days after the Rose Garden confession, Lisa showed up again, this time in white. The same white she once mocked for being too traditional, too soft for a woman like her, but now she wore it like armor, a wedding gown stitched with desperation. Her makeup was perfect from afar, but cracked up close, concealer unable to hide the red beneath her eyes, the quiver of her lips, the panic just beneath the surface. She waited outside my grandmother's home, clutching a torn envelope, the same one I'd handed her in front of everyone. She had destroyed it, shredded it to pieces. I stepped outside, preparing to walk down to town for last-minute arrangements. Kimberly had gone ahead to the bakery to pick up our order. Uncle Huang's health was deteriorating quickly, and we wanted to make sure the reception would be held early enough for him to attend. Lisa was already standing by the gate when I opened it. "You're really going to do it?" she asked, her voice soft, hoarse. "You're really going to marry her?" I didn't stop walking. I didn't answer. She stepped into my path, eyes wild. "You're not even angry, Henry. Don't you get it? Punish me, hit me, scream, do something. Just don't marry someone else." Still, I said nothing. She grabbed my arm. "You love me. You've always loved me. Don't lie to me now. Marrying her won't fix anything. Just punish me if that's what you want. Just don't do this." I gently pulled my arm away, then met her gaze with the same expression she once gave me the night she deleted me from her life. "Your presence makes Kimberly uncomfortable," I said. "Let's not stay in touch." Her eyes widened. For a second, I could see her piecing it together. The weight of those words, the mirror of her own cruelty, held up right to her face. Her hands trembled. "You don't mean that?" I nodded. "I do." And then I turned. She sank to her knees. Right there, in the middle of the path. Her white dress pooling around her like spilled milk. She clutched at the gravel, sobbing, not caring who watched. Her voice was raw, cracked from screaming. "I know I was wrong. I was so wrong. Please, please, Henry, I'll do anything. I'll wait now. I'll wait 12 years. I'll wait forever if that's what it takes." I didn't turn around. Because I had already waited long enough. That evening, Kimberly was sitting by the window with a mug of chamomile tea, her eyes fixed on something distant. Pudding rested beside her feet, his tail wagging slow and lazy. She looked up when I entered, then turned her gaze back to the window. "You're quiet," I said. She held something in her lap, an old leather-bound book, the corners worn, the edges curled. I recognized it. It was her childhood diary. I hadn't seen it in over a decade. "I found this in one of Dad's old boxes," she said, her voice soft. "I didn't mean to read it, but I did." I walked closer, and she held the book open to a page filled with looping handwriting and tiny ink hearts in the margins. She read aloud. March 9th. Henry cried again today. The older boys called him names after gym class. I cornered one behind the cafeteria and made him promise not to say it again. She flipped to another page. May 14th. Henry stopped sitting with me after school. Lisa came to pick him up. He smiled when he saw her. I told myself not to be jealous. He only cries when I'm around. Her fingers paused on a last entry. One dated a few years later. October 2nd, Lisa called him her Romeo in front of everyone. I don't think she knows what that name means to him. I don't think she cares. If Henry ever needs a place to breathe, I hope he remembers mine is always quiet. The room stayed still after she stopped reading. Even the wind outside paused as if not wanting to interrupt. I knelt beside her, reaching for the diary. "I didn't know." "You weren't supposed to," she said with a half smile. "It wasn't about you knowing, it was just about being there." A memory pushed forward. Years ago, under a cherry blossom tree by the schoolyard, a boy had taken my sketchbook and ripped it in two. I'd run off, fists clenched, trying not to cry, but someone had followed. Kimberly. She didn't speak. She just sat next to me on the cold pavement, patting my back until I stopped shaking. That same week, the boy showed up at school with a black eye and a mysterious transfer form signed by his parents. And just like that, he was gone. I turned the pages slowly, reading her younger self's handwriting. Pages of moments I'd forgotten, moments that didn't belong in grand gestures or dramatic tears, but in quiet defense, loyal presence, silent comfort. The kind of love that didn't demand attention. It just existed, like air, like warmth. "You're not like her," I said quietly. "She made love feel like a chase. You make it feel like home." Kimberly looked at me then, and this time, there was no distance in her eyes. Just honesty, just her. "Does it scare you?" she asked. "No," I whispered. "It makes me want to stay." We sat like that for a long time, the pages of her diary open between us, and for the first time in years, I let myself believe that love didn't have to be loud to be real. It just had to be true. We didn't have a cathedral or a violin quartet. There was no diamond chandelier or velvet aisle, just a wooden arch draped in white linen, a backyard filled with the scent of wildflowers, and the distant sound of cicadas humming into the warm southern air. Kimberly walked toward me in a cream-colored dress her father once said belonged to her mother. Her hair was pinned up with delicate blossoms from the tree that had once shaded us as children. Her eyes, those steady, thoughtful eyes, didn't flinch, didn't waver. They just found mine. And held them. I wore a simple black suit. No designer labels, no flash. But my shoes were polished, and my tie matched the lace on her dress. Pudding, freshly bathed and wearing a tiny ribbon collar, trotted between our feet like he was officiating. Uncle Huang sat at the front, wrapped in blankets, thinner than ever, but smiling with a strength I hadn't seen in weeks. He nodded as I took Kimberly's hand, the tremble in his fingers betraying the effort it took to lift his thumb in approval. We exchanged vows beneath the old cherry tree where Kimberly once found me crying. No crowd, just Joel, Nadia, Greg, and a few neighbors we'd grown close to since I returned. Joel held the rings. Nadia cried, even though she swore she wouldn't. Greg mumbled something about allergies when his throat caught mid-toast. Kimberly and I sealed our marriage with a kiss that wasn't dramatic or sweeping, but gentle, steady, certain. From the road, far beyond the trellis, I saw a figure. She wore white. But it wasn't a bride's white anymore, it was a shadow of one. The makeup was perfect, as always, but the smile was gone. Her arms clutched the gate, knuckles white, bouquet wilted. Lisa never received an invitation. She stood too far to interrupt, too near to be ignored. But no one turned. No one waved. And no one stopped her from watching. When the music played, and the cheers rose, I didn't look her way. Neither did Kimberly. She had already become a memory, and memories didn't belong in new beginnings. Weeks passed. Then months. Morning routines bloomed like clockwork. Kimberly brewed loose-leaf tea in a clay pot that she swore made it taste better. She'd write letters she never sent, sketch the wind in the trees, and quietly feed Pudding his biscuits before I even opened my eyes. I spent hours restoring the garden, fixing broken shelves, learning to build with my hands instead of just my thoughts. Peace doesn't arrive all at once, it trickles in slowly, through the smell of jasmine, the sound of boiling water, the sighs of an old dog curled at your feet. We didn't talk about Lisa, we didn't need to, but the town did. It was on the front page of the local paper one morning. Lin Corporation collapses after internal breach, former heir removed from board after scandal. The article detailed everything. Adam had used Lisa's credentials to access and leak proprietary data, profiting millions in offshore deals before vanishing. The board had voted to remove her father. Lisa was now persona non grata in the very empire she once flaunted. I folded the paper in half and placed it beneath a stack of unread mail. Somewhere, she was living in a house too big for her silence, in heels too expensive for the life she'd been left with. Her calls no longer came, her messages had stopped months ago. Kimberly noticed the paper, of course, but she never asked. One evening, while cleaning the attic, I stumbled on the diary again. It was worn now, its corners soft from years of use, the ink fading in places. A ribbon marked the final entry, one I hadn't seen before. Kimberly walked in, wiping her hands on a towel. "You're not supposed to be lifting that much," she said, her voice warm but teasing. I held up the diary. "You left the last page ensemble marked." She hesitated. "You can read it." I sat on the wooden bench beneath the window and opened to the page. Her handwriting was steady. No hearts, no embellishments, just clarity. March 3rd. He never noticed the way I looked at him when she called. He never saw how I placed my umbrella a little closer, so he'd take it when the rain started. I never fought for his love, I just stayed. Quiet, waiting. Because loving him wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. I closed the book and looked up at her. She stood with her back to the light, a silhouette shaped by patience. "I don't deserve this," I said softly. "You don't have to," she replied. I reached out for her hand. She gave it to me without hesitation. Our life wasn't built on grand passion, it was built on the things Lisa never gave me. Safety, stillness, a place to rest without fearing I'd be forgotten. I no longer measured love in declarations or arguments, I measured it in silent teacups, in shared glances, in the feel of her fingers brushing mine during a walk through the fields. Some nights, when the wind howled through the town and Pudding barked in his sleep, I'd look over and see Kimberly reading beside the lamp, and I'd wonder what kind of man I would have become if I hadn't been forced to wait so long for peace. But then she'd catch me looking, and she'd smile, and I'd know I didn't need to wonder anymore, because she was here, and I was home. 12 years of heartbreak were finally buried, not with revenge, but with peace in someone who never needed to be loved back loudly. Just completely.